Good morning, and thank you for joining us for our Founders Memorial Lecture, which will be followed by our Professional Awards presentation. I am pleased to introduce to you our presenter this morning, Michelle Samuel-Foo. Michelle is an assistant professor at Alabama State University and previously served for 10 years as the Southern Region Coordinator for the IR4 project, which focuses on facilitating the registration of pesticides for growers of specialty crops. Michelle is President-elect of the Southeastern Branch, ESA, and past President of the International Association of Black Entomologists. And now, without further ado, please welcome Michelle Samuel-Foo.
Hello everyone, it's my pleasure to be with you today to deliver the 2020 ESA Founders Memorial Lecture during the annual meeting of the Entomological Society of America. Today we will honor the life, the legacy, and contributions of Dr. Ernest Harris, a scholar, soldier, father, husband, mentor, friend, the list goes on, but above all, a man who loved entomology and dedicated much of his life to advancing the study of insects. The year 2020, while not over just yet, has been a year that many people will remember for a very long time to come for a multitude of reasons. Who could have predicted that we would be in the midst of a global pandemic, that world travel would be brought almost to its knees, and that professional and societal meetings that some people dread while others really look forward to would almost become a faint memory? Or that this would be the year that the public lynching of a black man in Minneapolis would pull the cover off of race relations in the US, and that Black Lives Matter would move from being a hashtag to a global rallying cry. I certainly wish that we were meeting in beautiful Orlando, Florida, but as a society we are making history today nonetheless. This is the first year since the inception of ESA that a virtual annual meeting is being held. It is also the first time that the subject and honoree of the lecture is a Black entomologist. I am grateful for the chance to address our society and to be able to publicly honor the work and legacy of Dr. Harris. I was beyond thrilled to receive the call alerting me that I was chosen to give this year's Founders Memorial Lecture. I almost missed it though, as I rarely answer calls from unknown numbers after hours. I always think to myself that if it's a legitimate caller, they will leave a voicemail. But on that drizzly Tuesday, I answered, and it's the type of call that we all wish to receive with happy news, and so here I am today. For those of you who are wondering what it takes to be selected to give the Founders Memorial Lecture, arguably one of the highest honors of the Entomological Society of America, I'd like to share my personal experience.
I, like many others, receive regular notifications from Becky Anthony and the staff at ESA Central. And when this particular announcement came out inviting applications for the lecture, I was reminded of the Entomology Today article that Rob Morrison, a member of ESA's newly formed Committee on Canvassing for Awards and Honors, had written, entitled, Imposter Syndrome, Bias and Doubt, Overcoming Barriers to Honoring All Entomologists. In this paper, Rob pointed out that awareness of disparities in who gets awards has increased in entomology. Traditionally, recognition and the Society's highest awards has gone to mostly white and all-male recipients. Dr. Morrison also pointed out that our society by STEM standards, however, is fairly diverse, roughly half men and women, still more white than it should be, however, based on background demographics in the United States, but with definite and fairly substantial representation by other groups. Rob's article came out on February 12, 2020. I had hung it just to the left of my work desk, where I have a recycled pinboard that I had salvaged from the Goodwill store in Gainesville, Florida. On February 14th, my colleague Dr. Simon Zabello sent an email to the International Association of Black Entomologists that said the following. Colleagues, I recommend that you read this Entomology Today article and prepare to nominate yourself or someone who you think deserves to be nominated for one of ESA's awards. It was Valentine's Day. And here I was receiving an email about the very same article I had printed because it had impacted me. I figured this had to be at least as good as receiving flowers on Valentine's Day. If you follow me on social media, you'll know that flowers and insects are dear to me, and I often hashtag, "She only wanted flowers." So this was the encouragement I needed, and with that I decided that this would be the year that I take the call for nominations seriously. I talked about my interest in wanting to submit an application to a dear friend of mine, Oscar Liebert, another black entomologist, and he agreed that it was a good idea. In fact, he said, "Just do it," that famous Nike slogan. So I submitted the skeleton of the nomination, and a couple days later, Cindy Myers from ESA Central contacted me to ask if I was going to complete it. She also very graciously pointed out that I had mixed up some of the items in the initiation, and she offered to help fix them. I sent emails and made calls requesting letters to include in the application packet from people who were familiar with my scholar and my ability to communicate, and thankfully, everyone agreed to help. In fact, I got more letters than I could include in the packet, which as it turns out has a 20-page limit, so this meant that I got to decide who said the best things about me. And who doesn't like having a problem like this, right? Dr. Chris Freeman, who is now the department chair at UGA's entomology department, and whom I first met while I was a student in her and Dr. Rubison's biocontrol course in the mid-2000s, sent in a letter that she ended with, "Michelle, I can't wait to hear you give this talk. I always tell my children that you have to speak positively, and you also have to speak things into existence, and here was Dr. Freeman doing just this for me." The weekend before the packet was due to ESA, I spent about 4.5 hours putting everything together. It really shouldn't have taken that long, but I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and so it did. My journey to this platform is a little bit different than that of last year's winner, Dr. Walter Leal, who in his opening remarks explained that he was nominated by a colleague and friend whom he had previously worked with for many years, organizing various symposia, and that the final decision for him to be selected was also made by a friend, I believe. I didn't, and still don't necessarily have as broad of a network, and I worried that this would put me at a distinct disadvantage. But again, the words of Rob Morrison played out for me. Rob had written, "Don't underestimate your own accomplishments or sense of worth, especially if you identify with an underrepresented group." This really resonated with me, so I just did it. Not quite expecting that I would win the award, but yet here I am today. Okay, so enough about me. Today I have the distinct privilege of talking about the life and entomological contributions of Dr. Ernest James Harris. My hope today is that by the end of this talk, Ernest Harris will become a household name for both entomology and all-round scientific excellence. I'll begin by talking to you about the early life of Dr. Harris. Ernie James Harris was named after his father, James. He was born on May 24, 1928, in North Little Rock, Arkansas, a town with historical ties to the transportation industry, the military, and agriculture. From apple orchards in the Northwest to the cotton plantations of the Delta, agriculture fed the manufacturing sector. Ernest arrived just after the Great Flood of 1927 that saw the Arkansas River spill its waters into the city's downtown and low-lying neighborhoods. Ernie's parents, James and Dorothy Harris, they had a modest farm, and when I say modest, I mean that there was no electricity, and the family relied on their 2 mules for plowing the fields, while other farm tasks were all hand-done by the family of 8. Here's a picture of Ernie and his siblings, all as adults. Ernie was the eldest of his 6 siblings. They grew cotton, as was commonplace at the time. As a boy, Ernie picked cotton alongside his parents and his siblings. This meant that every year he had to miss a good portion of the school term, and in order to get any work done, he was relegated to studying at night via candlelight. Now, despite Ernie and I growing up in very different generations, studying via candlelight is very familiar to me. As a girl growing up in Trinidad, electricity wasn't always very reliable, and there would be distinct periods of time when the current would be out, and in order for me to get my assignments done, I too had to study via candlelight. But back to Ernie. The local principal of the high school that he attended was aware of their home situation, and he would bring by work for them to complete while they were out of school. Being the diligent student that he was, when Ernest did have the chance to return to school, he found that he was on par with his classmates, despite his prolonged absence from the classroom. This is somewhat comparable, I think, to virtual school or homeschooling today, and if you're a parent of a K-12 child this spring or this fall, perhaps you got a dose of this yourself. The school that Ernest Harris attended, Pulaski County Training School, today called Harris Elementary, was segregated. When Ernest finished high school in May 1946, it was towards the end of World War II, and the GI Bill was becoming available to veterans. He became interested in airplanes and dreamed about becoming a pilot. He figured that the chances of him being able to go into the Air Force was slim, so he opted for the Marine Corps and enlisted with the help of a... The Marine Corps began accepting black service members after President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed an executive order on June 25, 1941, which prohibited racial discrimination in the national defense industry. It was the first federal action, though not a law, that promoted equal opportunity and prohibited employment discrimination in the United States. That federal action prompted the construction of Montfort Point, where approximately 20,000 black recruits trained from 1942 until 1949, until President Harry S. Truman signed an executive order that ended segregation in the military on July 26, 1948. Ernest joined the Marines to be able to take advantage of the education benefit that was offered. After basic training, he was put into an artillery outfit to become proficient at using a gun. He was then sent to Montfort Point Camp in North Carolina. Remember, the outfits were segregated at the time of Ernie's enlistment, and he was assigned to low-level menial tasks. Not surprisingly, this didn't hold his interest. I learned that Ernie thought to himself, if this is all I have to look forward to, then I might as well get out. And so this is how he started going to college. Ernie took the GI Bill and enrolled in Arkansas Agricultural, Mechanical, and Normal College, today known as the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. This is a land-grant HBCU today. This means that it's a historically black college in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. The location for this school was chosen because of the large number of African Americans that were there at the time, and because it was a major economic center in South Central Arkansas. He used some of the GI Bill to help pay for his younger sister to attend normal college also. After spending 3 years at normal college, he learned that the Marine was sending recruits for officer training. He of course volunteered, but they denied him the opportunity to continue on in the services, however, on account of his eyesight being poor. So Ernest, being Ernest, went on to complete his college degree, and he graduated in 1951. At normal college, he had majored in zoology and pursued a minor in chemistry. He took botany and zoology courses with Dr. Rufus Kane, and Ernest wrote about him in the Memoirs of Black Entomologists the following. I liked him as a person and appreciated the clarity by which he taught science. His teaching and illustrating of biological principles motivated me to become a science major. Ernie left Arkansas to go on to Milwaukee, Wisconsin on a borrowed Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Despite his education and possessing a bachelor's degree, he could only find janitorial work initially. Remember, this was back in the 1950s in America. The history of people of African descent in America is a pendulum of progress and setbacks, of resilience and retaliation. There have been allies, but there have been opponents too. Luckily, Ernest's chemistry minor came in handy, and he was able to land a job with an iron manufacturing company called Malibu Iron Manufacturing. This company was known for producing products that could stretch before they broke. His job was to do a chemical analysis of the ore while it was in the furnace, so that adjustments could be made to get to the quality as they needed it. He had turned down an offer to become a science teacher in Oklahoma. While working at the iron plant, he earned enough money to purchase a motorcycle of his own. He bought a British motorcycle and would often take long road trips, not even stopping to rest or overnight at a motel. It gave him great joy to ride. One year, he went back to vacation to Arkansas and he took his parents for a ride on his bike, and in a twist of fate, the motorcycle had broken down. And at the time, the transmission and the motor were bolted together, and he was supposed to be checking the tension on the bike, but he wasn't thinking about this. So this meant that he couldn't ride it back home. In Arkansas, he had to take a train to return to Milwaukee. At the train station, when he was returning home, he met a friend from college who introduced him to Betty Jo Hawkins, who later became Betty Jo Harris. She was going to Milwaukee, and being the gentleman that he was, he took the time to help Betty Jo make contact with her friend. He knew Milwaukee really well from his time spent riding. They were married in May 1954, and Betty Jo describes their marriage as seamless. In a recorded interview with USDA-ARS, Ernie says that they have been very supportive of each other, and in fact, they remained lifelong partners. Now that he was a married man, he decided to put his motorcycle career behind him, and Ernest decided to enroll in graduate school to earn an MS degree in zoology at Marquette University in Minnesota. At Marquette, he had a classmate who was going to work for the Forest Service during the summer as a forestry aide, and Ernie wanted to do the same thing, so he inquired and was fortunate enough to be assigned to work with Arnold Draws, who was a USDA forest entomologist at the time. He worked with Mr. Draws for 3 months in the summer of 1955. They worked in the picturesque Chippewa National Forest in Cass Lake, Minnesota. And this experience really opened his eyes. Mind you, Ernie's interest in entomology had emerged when he was just a boy. He would assist his mother in their vegetable garden, and she would show him the damage insects did to her cabbage and her tomato plants. She would also collect the worms that she found in her garden and keep them in a can so that they couldn't feed on the plants. Working with Dr. Droz really opened Ernie's eyes. He knew then that he wanted to work with forest insects. While working with Arnold Draws, Ernie met Dr. Lawrence Kotkamp, a toxicologist at the University of Minnesota. He talked with him about his interest in becoming an entomologist and sought his help to get into the Department of Entomology at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Kotkamp committed to help him, but told him that students who had a stronger scholastic record than he did would have priority. He also said that they would let him know when was the right time for him to enroll. Mind you, remember, this was during the time that the governor of Arkansas was blocking black students from going to high schools, so he bid his time. Ernie worked at the University of Minnesota Cloquet Forest, continuing to record insect damage to forest trees, and in the fall of 1957, he began his studies as a graduate assistant in the Department of Entomology at the University of Minnesota. He talked about one of his greatest challenges in graduate school and the University of Minnesota being taking the insect physiology and toxicology courses. He mentioned in the Memoirs of Black Entomologists that he had difficulty completing course tests. He could express himself verbally but had difficulty finishing the written tests in the allotted time. Nevertheless, he was awarded the master's degree in entomology in August of 1959. His master's work examined the ecology of Cryptorhinus weevils. At this time, he was living with Betty Jo and their first son, Mark, in housing that was provided to veteran students. With his MS degree in entomology in tow, he sought a job with the USDA. But each time that he saw an ad and applied, he would never receive an acknowledgement of his application, and needless to say, disappointment started to set in. Luckily, his professor from Normal College, Dr. Kane, had contacted him about a position to teach biology in Pine Bluff, and so he took this job because he needed a job. The very next day, in a twist of fate, he was offered a position as a forest entomologist with the state of Minnesota. Can you imagine? But as he had committed to his professor, he didn't think that he could renege on his commitment. During this time, his wife worked in admissions and records, so when he told her about his job back in Arkansas, she was not happy. But still, they moved back to Arkansas. A few years later, that call from the USDA that he was hoping for finally came. Drs. Lauren Steiner and Edward Knipling were searching for an entomologist to work in the Mariana Islands to help eradicate fruit flies. He was beyond thrilled, but his excitement was cut somewhat short as the university did not want to release him from the contract that he had unless he found a replacement that would satisfy their requirements. Luckily, he had a friend who could step in, who was qualified, and could take his place, and with this, Ernie was able to accept his first position with the USDA, and they sent him to Hawaii. Again, in the Memoirs of Black Entomologists, Ernie says this of USDA. My most important postgraduate experience was joining the staff of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Agriculture Research Service Fruit Fly Research Laboratory in Honolulu, Hawaii. I was very excited and happy to be a part of the Fruit Fly Laboratory. So in 1962, Ernie joined USDA and began working with Dr. Edward Knipling on fruit flies in the Mariana Islands. Specifically, they worked on the sterile insect method that had been proven to be effective against screwworm flies. It was unknown at this time if it would be effective against fruit flies. And with this move, Ernie effectively became one of the first African-American research scientists in USDA. His family was a young one at this time when he arrived in Hawaii. His son Mark was just 6 or 7 years old, and his daughter Tanya was 2 years old. After 2 weeks of orientation in Hawaii, Ernie and his family was sent to Agana, Guam. He supported the Mariana Island pilot test to eradicate the melon fly and the oriental fruit fly from Rota. His job was to receive the sterile fly pupae that had been reared in Honolulu and shipped to Guam via Pan Am Airlines. With assistance, they loaded sterile melon fly pupae into drop boxes. After emergence in the drop boxes, Navy personnel transported the flies to Rota. Then Ernie and others released the flies. In addition, they prepared fiberboard wafers, which were 2-inch squares, by saturating them with methyl eugenol and with the toxicum dibrom. U.S. Navy pilots transported the sterile melon flies and the methyl eugenol wafers in a twin-engine airplane and dropped them on Rota. The U.S. Air Force provided transportation of Hawaiian fruit fly personnel from Honolulu to Guam on military air transport. This was a high-priority project of interest to USDA, Army, Navy, and Air Force pest control personnel. Since no one had done eradication before, there was keen interest in finding out if the pilot test in Rota, Mariana Islands, would be successful. In addition to releasing flies and making eugenol lured drops on Rota, they set up and serviced oriental fruit fly and melon traps on Guam to monitor populations of these two species on the island. And so, ladies and gentlemen, with this was the beginning of Ernie's career with the USDA. After they successfully eradicated melon fly and oriental fruit fly from Rota, they worked on Saipan and Tianan. While he was in Guam, Hurricane Karen, which was a Category 5 hurricane, struck Guam. It severely damaged the lab. When he went to report the damage, the lines were so long that he decided that this time would be better spent actually repairing the damage the storm had caused. And with some help, they were able to fix up the lab in just about a week, and this allowed for the program to continue. He returned to Hawaii in 1963. He was interested to learn about the ecology of fruit flies in the island of Oahu. As there was keen interest in the outcome of the program, the top management of ARS would check in periodically, and this allowed Ernest to become acquainted with some top officials. In a visit to Beltsville, Maryland, he was offered a job to greet visitors to the ARS facility by a public relations team. He thankfully didn't take this, and guess what? This was when another opportunity fell into his lap. This one was in North Africa, and not surprisingly, this excited him. The caveat here was that he needed to learn to speak French, and in true Ernest style, he and his family all began to study French. Ernie didn't have a Ph.D. at this point, and he recognized that the lack of a terminal degree would hinder his professional growth, so he looked for ways to earn his doctorate degree. He is quoted as saying, "Having a degree doesn't guarantee anything. But one thing for sure is there are some things that I won't even be considered for without it. And this is the gospel truth that I know is a reality for my life, and I'm sure the life of many others as well. Around this time, ARS had started to encourage its employees to pursue higher education. At first, employees had to pay their own tuition, but then there was a window of opportunity where the agency said that if you were working on your degree, you didn't have to go on leave. You could do it as part of your regular duties, so he took advantage of this. In 1965, he enrolled at the University of Hawaii to obtain his Ph.D. Mr. Taylor, the then chief of the ARS Fruit Insect Branch, had selected him as a leader and coordinator of the North Africa Regional Mediterranean Fruit Fly Suppression Program in the U.S. Agency for International Development. The goal of this program was to reduce the damage caused by this insect on export citrus crops in Tunis, Tunisia, and Marrakesh, Morocco. He managed to convince his Ph.D. committee to allow him to use his work in North Africa as his dissertation research. His academic progress was slow, but he eventually completed his doctorate. From 1972 to 1985, Dr. Harris served as research leader of the Biology and Ecology Research Unit of the Tropical Fruit and Vegetable Research Lab in Honolulu, the position formerly held by Lauren Steiner. His research on fruit fly ecology established the fundamental grounds for the ongoing Mediterranean fruit fly exclusion program in California. He also provided advisory work to international programs in Pakistan, Egypt, and Chile, where the Mediterranean fruit fly was eradicated in 1975, allowing the export of fruit fly-free citrus fruits to this day. The same approach was later adopted by Peru. After 1983, Ernie's research focused on developing rearing methods for the oriental fruit fly parasitoid, Phopias arisanus, investigating optimal rearing conditions to increase female offspring ratio for this very hard-to-rear insect. This parasitoid was eventually exported and established in Mexico, Reunion, French Polynesia, Micronesia, and Africa. Through lab selection, Dr. Harris also developed stable strains of this parasitoid adapted to attack the Mediterranean fruit fly and melon fly. Ernie continued to work and then finally hung up his net and officially retired at 77 years old in February 2006. This did not mean that he stopped working altogether. In fact, he went to work daily until the Honolulu ARS lab closed in 2009. In terms of productivity, Dr. Harris authored and co-authored a total of 104 papers and book chapters, with his final publication coming in 2016 when he was 88 years old. Dr. Harris had a long and prosperous career as a black entomologist, despite facing challenges along the way. Ernie remained an optimistic, gentle, and humble soul for which he is fondly remembered today. I think his story is an outstanding one, and he most definitely serves as a role model and inspiration for scientists and entomologists, young and old, black, white, red, yellow, you pick a color. In the latter part of his life, Ernie received much recognition and accolades for his work as an entomologist from a plethora of groups and organizations, including the Entomological Society of America, the Royal Entomological Society of London, the Chilean government, and the University of Hawaii. He was also recognized by his fraternity, the Brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha Incorporated, for his outstanding contributions. As an Alpha, he was a very well-respected brother and influential member. Dr. Harris was named to the ARS Hall of Fame in September 2017 for his innovative contributions to agriculture. The ARS Hall of Fame was established in 1986 to honor senior agency researchers for outstanding lifelong achievements in agricultural science and technology. In 2012, Dr. Harris earned a Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, for his service to the state of Hawaii. And in 1999, Ernie was inducted into the Arkansas Black Hall of Fame. Arguably, his most prestigious recognition was that of receiving the Congressional Gold Medal in November 2016 for his extraordinary contributions as a Marine assigned to Montford Point in North Carolina. You'll recall that Harris was among the first African Americans to volunteer to serve with the U.S. Marines at Montford Point in 1946, back when the military was segregated and African Americans faced harsh discrimination while serving.
Ernest Harris was truly a gentle giant. While learning about Dr. Harris, it dawned on me that only when the mind is free can you live your life as if something is at stake. The lack of meaningful support, not just lip service, of which there is always a surplus, means that for people of color, the workload can be crippling and the path to success can be filled with an exorbitant amount of roadblocks. Race is never far away from the surface of any situation in the U.S. This year's social justice movement that we all bore witness to and continue to witness exemplifies the need for us to level the playing field and welcome others into our labs and working groups, because meaningful contributions can come from various backgrounds and experiences. Small acts of gratuitous cruelty, discrimination, and even lack of consideration for funding because the person's name is unknown or the individual didn't get mentored by the lifelong expert in a niche area are roadblocks that many of us have had to face at one point or another. I'll end by saying that today, more than ever, we have an obligation to honor and to make a genuine effort to include broad representation when we think of entomology. We also have to ask ourselves, why is it important to have diversity among those who study diversity? I encourage everyone to read the similarly titled article that was recently published in American Entomologist that was authored by a group of diverse and talented entomologists that I had the privilege to work with recently. To paraphrase from the article, why should we care if entomology is not diverse? Well, there are a number of reasons, but I'll point out that a lack of diversity limits our science and limits inclusivity in our scientific community, and it further marginalizes entomologists from already marginalized groups. As the very best expertise comes in many different backgrounds and via many different pathways to science, it's an important role that we all have to play. Ernest Harris was and still is a particularly strong role model for minority entomologists, including myself, and I'd argue for entomologists worldwide, regardless of race. Thanks again for joining me to learn more about this gentle giant of fruit fly entomology and management. Dr. Harris, we salute you, sir.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for that great presentation. We are thrilled that you were able to share such a remarkable story about Ernest Harris and to acknowledge his contributions to entomology. The next part of the program this morning will be honoring our ESA Professional Award winners. ESA Professional Award winners exemplify the best in the field, and I would like to personally congratulate each individual on their accomplishments. We look to you, the ESA membership, yearly to nominate your colleagues and peers, and we hope that you will nominate someone for an award. It is my pleasure to announce to you the ESA Award winners for 2020.